Barack Obama is not the only world leader in Europe this week. Roll out the red carpet for China's president. Xi Jinping, already billed by some as his nation's greatest reformer since Deng introduced the first post-Mao free market reforms. Xi Jinping's state visit marks the 50th anniversary of General de Gaulle establishing ties with China, with a deal to boost fledgling French carmaker Peugeot and orders for Airbus planes, helicopters. Xi's hosts on their best behavior. Forgotten is 2008 and the pro-Tibet protests that marred the passage of the Olympic flame through the streets of Paris. Instead, it's all about offering a taste of France, and not just the wine and cheese, as the world's second largest economy continues to grow and Chinese demand for consumer goods starts to take off in earnest. Where's China headed under Xi? What are the consequences of drawing ever closer to Beijing? Today, in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Xi Jinping, superstar, you might say. With us from Leipzig, Germany, political scientist Solange CHATELARD. Many thanks for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Here in the studio, Jean-François MEGLIO, president of the Paris-based Asia Center. Hello. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome back as well to a former Beijing correspondent for the Observer newspaper, Paris-based reporter Catherine Field.
Good evening.
And business consultant Alcuin, COURSIER, founder of Intelligence Business Horizons. You advise companies who are setting up in Asia.
Actually, I advise on the Franco-Chinese trade.
And on Franco-Chinese trade.
Good evening to everybody.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. During his 3 days in France, Xi Jinping, by the way, we're first going to talk about fashion. He's been sporting a suit and tie, as you've seen so far. But when he started his European tour, in the company of the Dutch royal couple, China's president turned heads with his traditional Mao-collared costume. State newspaper China Daily congratulating Xi for displaying national pride and his endorsement of Chinese culture. Catherine Field, what comment would you give us on Xi's outfit at that dinner?
Well, first of all, it's quite trendy to dress like that. I mean, there are shops in Hong Kong and parts of China, Shanghai Tang, that have made absolute fortunes selling these traditional Chinese outfits. So that would have gone down very well among some of the elite in China, as well as some of the elite and trendy people in Hong Kong.
State media insisting this is not a political statement.
This is the Chinese president. Everything he does is a political statement. Let's be clear about that. This wasn't his wardrobe is probably as carefully chosen as, say, Kate Middleton or Prince William of Great Britain. So it was probably also a bit of a push for Chinese fashion as well. They're trying to break into the European market.
And the relationship with Mao is something that's come up in conversation since Xi came to power.
Yeah, we've got to be careful here. In the Western countries, we tend to call this suit a Mao-style suit, but it's a Zhongshan style, which means before the revolution, meaning that this is the way intellectuals used to dress between the 1910s and 1930s. But culture was at the very core of Xi's visit in France, because one of the events which has not been publicized too much is his visit to UNESCO head office in Paris. And his speech was very much about Chinese culture. It was full of allusions to Chinese cuisine, Chinese poetry, Chinese traditions, saying that China has one of the multiple cultures in the world, but he definitely wants Chinese culture to be integrated in a multipolar culture and having its own space in the global culture, as opposed to have one dominant culture. And he didn't point out fingers at anyone, but everyone understood.
And you were at the speech that was given today by the French president and the Chinese president, marking those 50 years of diplomatic relations. The French president began his speech with a nod to that Chinese culture. Would you say that China's finally getting its due respect?
Well, Xi Jinping has two priorities. One is domestic, and it's anti-corruption. and every Chinese in China would tell you so. Two priorities. One is anti-corruption, and second is soft power. So there is a huge amount of events which took place during this French tour, which revolves around soft power. The French president spoke a little bit more about economy and international relations. Xi Jinping also spoke about that, but he insisted very much on culture.
Solange Guo-Chatelard, how do you think she's doing when you see him act as an ambassador for his nation here in France?
I'd like to go back to your first comment on his clothes. I think it's very important to make a distinction between associating it to a Mao suit and, in fact, associating it as explained to us as a Sun Zhongshan suit. So that's actually a tip of the hat to what the Communist Party discourse would call the founding father of modern China. So effectively the first president of Republican China. So it's a very different political message, actually. And in fact, Hu Jintao, when he was celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Communist Party, was also wearing a Sun Zhongshan suit. If you go back to those images of him going down the main Chang'an Avenue, which is the Avenue of Peace, past Tiananmen, in front of the Forbidden City, he's wearing a Sun Zhongshan suit. And that is a very careful diplomatic deflection away from a specific sort of charismatic leader, demagogy type of following to a very different kind of, it's sending out a very different, more subtle political message. But I think he is a part of a new generation of political leaders, him and his wife. There's certainly a convergence to some extent of the posturing, if you like, of leaders, of heads of states, and how now the role of the First Lady is evolving, if you like, in the way states handle each other and they do diplomacy. And we see this trend happening. We see the trend. We saw the trend in France with Carla Bruni. We saw the trend with Michelle Obama. Women who tend to take on a more important role. And I think that Xi's wife, who is a very popular Chinese folklorist singer in China, also fits that trend. But we have a sort of a global alignment of the way leaders would like to present themselves both to their own people, but also as couples to nations around them.
All right, Solange, I'm just going to tell you that we have a little bit of a technical issue with your microphone. I believe it's a little too close to your face. You need to pull it away just a little bit. Otherwise, you're, as we say in the parlance of journalists, popping your peas. Let me ask you...
is this better?
Much better. Alcuin COURSIER, let me ask you here. You just heard Solange talk about here, there's... tonight there's going to be, a private dinner at the Palace of Versailles. There's going to be opera, and it's going to be, that private dinner is going to have the French president, François Hollande, Xi Jinping, and of course his wife, who's also very charismatic, Peng Liyuan.
Yeah. First of all, I think it is an event that many Chinese, not only in China, I mean the Chinese all over the world, which can be spread everywhere, including me, well, they're the people who are looking for this kind of event. So all those details and how do they present themselves is related to identity of Chinese. I myself is a French nationality, but I'm Chinese heritage. So when the Chinese talk about Chinese, we are not talking about nationality. It is not like the French. When we talk about French, we talk about the republic, the nationality. But the Chinese are talking the cultural roots that we are talking about. And when this kind of events, I think the president and the first lady is representing a cultural pride of the Chinese, not only the nationality, but all the Chinese. And this kind of national ceremony is it give a quite of cultural national pride for many people, including those overseas, and it is very symbolic as well. And also like to maybe give a little bit remark to the custom of the mouse coat or the Zhongshan Zhuang. It's really very, for me, it's quite a surprise. Since so many years, the president of China do not wear the Zhongshan Zhuang in international meetings. So it is quite symbolic. I think at least two things we can remark of. First of all, maybe it's because the Chinese now is going to another style of economic. We are thinking to look for our own self-identity. So the authentic, people understand if you really want to be great, to be equality in the international stage, you must have your own authentic. And maybe he want to show in the international state that China is not a copycat. And we have also our own cultural proud. And the other symbol could be interesting is Zhongshan for the Chinese is in memory of Sun Zhongshan, the godfather from the Taiwanese. So maybe it's also symbolic to show he is a Chinese for the universal, what we call the Chinese spread over the world, especially recently Taiwan, there is some internal instability or anti-government movement, which is against the conflicts, the treaties signed between Taiwan and China. Maybe he wants to show in the international image that he represents every Chinese, including the Taiwanese, and of course the Hong Kong people. That's where I came from.
Right. And I just want to get back to that point that both you and Jean-François were making about culture, and you were alluding to that speech that was given at the UN Cultural Arm. UNESCO is headquartered here in Paris. Xi Jinping, for all the talk of him being a different kind of Chinese leader, very much saying that he was in favor of tradition.
As China continues to make economic and social progress, the Chinese civilization will keep pace with the times and acquire greater vitality. A civilization carries on its back the soul of a country or a nation. It needs to be passed on from one generation to the next. And more importantly, it needs to keep pace with the times and innovate with courage.
All right, so Jean-François MEGLIO, can you sort of read between the lines here? What's the message he's sending?
Well, the message is our culture is as valuable as yours. You have to learn it. If you have to understand what we are. And that was a point which was made very often by the Chinese speakers during the various talks which were held in Paris today. In Quai d'Orsay, we also had a cultural session during the afternoon symposium. And one point which was brought up very often by the Chinese entrepreneurs, even the entrepreneurs, was the Westerners have so much difficulties in China because we know more about your culture that you know about our culture. So there is a kind of quest for recognition by China. This quest was always there, but there is a feeling that now is the moment where you can express it.
All right, and just to give you an example, we have a tweet here from the digital online newspaper, The Local. Paris commuters angry as the number 13 metro line stations closed in rush hour because of visit of Chinese president. Solange, this idea of being interested in China's culture and everything, it seems as though it's not seeping through to those commuters.
Well, I think residents are generally disturbed when there are state visits. I mean, I've heard similar stories of Chinese pedestrian cyclists being sort of rushed and almost crushed, in fact, on the streets as African heads of states are driven down some of Beijing's main avenues. I was also in Dar es Salaam last year during Obama's visit, and they needed to mobilize quite a lot of security to accompany his visit, just like his current visit to Europe. So I think it's quite normal that people on the ground are a bit upset, and that's part of statecraft, if you like. But we spoke a lot about culture, but I think we need to make it relevant. When and why and how does it become relevant? And I think this is something that has been missed in the discussion. I think behind a lot of this cultural rhetoric, which is relevant, which is very important, and which is also a vehicle to send a message across, both to France, the rest of the world, but also back to China, are serious issues of economic and strategic nature. And Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, does have priorities on his agenda list. So does the French president. And I think they're also meeting to discuss these issues. But just before I finish, to go back to the question of generations and cultures, we have to bear in mind that while Xi Jinping appears to be a very modern leader, a new innovative leader, which he is, we have to bear in mind that he is what we call the fifth generation of Communist Party leaders. His father was a top communist military official who was effectively the first generation of Communist Party leaders. So what we're seeing effectively is the creation of a new political institutional legacy. And I think that's what is somewhat behind the lines of his discussion, is that from the difference between Xi and Deng Xiaoping, as you mentioned earlier, is that Deng Xiaoping didn't really have any elders that he could look up to, that he could veneer. Effectively, the only elder that he had was Mao, whereas Xi has 4 generations behind him. And that is actually a very important message of the sedimentation of a certain political culture, which is set to last and is set to be transmitted for more and more and more generations to come. But in order for that to be efficient, China needs to be innovative, China needs to adapt, and China needs to look ahead as well. But where he is different, I would say, is this unique position of very future-driven, sight of how they're going to move the country forward, how they're going to engage with the rest of the world, which is unprecedented if you compare it to his predecessors, but also this very important tie and respect for his legacy and his dynastic legacy. And that is very important to bear the intergenerational process in mind.
For 2 reasons. One is that stating the importance of traditional culture is a kind of breakup with what happened during Xi's youth. Because when he was young, he was deported during Cultural Revolution. He belongs to the first generation of students, which I also belong to because I was first student in China back then when the universities opened again. So he suffered from Cultural Revolution. Not only did he suffer from Cultural Revolution, but he also was against his father at one point. So, you know, there is a very deep dimension.
So there's continuity, but there's also breaks.
It's not as simple as Solange said.
Not as simple as she said. We're going to pick up on this point and on the need to engage with the wider world and how China is doing it. We'll also ask how the French are doing it. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 Debate.